Horror Story. Every view, every like, and every new subscriber helps keep these stories alive. If you're someone who craves that late-night chill, that heart-racing moments, then this is your place. Subscribe to Eclipse Stories right now and become part of a community that doesn't just listen to stories. We live them together. Don't just watch from the shadows. Step in, join us, and never miss the next night of fear. Now, let's dive into the stories. It's been almost 15 years now, but I can still remember the first night we stepped into that house. Back then, nothing about it felt unusual. My wife, Emily, had fallen in love with the tall windows that looked out onto the street, and my daughter, Sophie, couldn't stop running up and down the long hallway that led to the back door. We'd been searching for months, trying to find a place that felt like more than just a house. This one felt like the answer we had been waiting for. I remember walking through each room and picturing our life filling the space. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh paint. The walls still carried the echo of the last owner's hammer, and even though the floor creaked in places, it had a certain warmth that pulled us in. We told ourselves it wasn't just four walls. It was a new start, a place where Sophie could grow up safe. That first week, we were full of excitement. Emily unpacked the dishes. Sophie drew pictures of our family that she taped to the fridge, and I busied myself in the garage, already imagining it as a little workshop. The neighbors waved politely when they saw us, and for a while, I thought we'd found the quiet corner of the world we'd always wanted. At night, Emily and I sat on the back porch with cups of tea, listening to the sound of crickets while Sophie slept upstairs. Everything felt easy, almost too easy in hindsight. The first strange thing happened about 2 weeks in. It was late, around midnight, and I had just finished locking the doors before heading up to bed. I passed by the living room window and noticed someone standing across the street. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor out for a smoke, but they weren't near any of the houses. They were right under the streetlight, head tilted up toward our home. Their face was hidden by the shadow of a hood, and the way they just stood there without moving made my skin crawl. I didn't wake Emily. I told myself it was nothing, maybe some teenager cutting through the neighborhood. By the time I checked again, the person was gone. The street was empty, silent except for the buzzing of the lamp above. I tried to laugh it off, but it stuck with me. The next night, I saw something else. This time, I was brushing my teeth when I heard Sophie call out. It wasn't a scream, more like a whimper, the kind a child makes when caught in a bad dream. I went to her room, expecting to find her half asleep, but she was sitting upright in bed with her blanket clutched tight around her shoulders. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked. She pointed at her closet. "Someone was there," she whispered. I checked. Of course, there was nothing, just her little dresses and jackets swinging from their hangers. I smiled, told her it was only her imagination, and tucked her back in. But when I turned off the light, she begged me to leave the closet door closed. That part bothered me. Sophie had always liked sleeping with it open, claiming she didn't like the dark. I didn't tell Emily right away. She was already overwhelmed with the move and settling into her new teaching job. I convinced myself it was just adjustment nerves. Kids get scared in new rooms. Still, a small thought lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. A few nights later, I woke to a sound downstairs. It was soft, like someone stepping carefully, trying not to be heard. I sat up in bed, listening. Emily was asleep beside me, her breathing steady, and the house should have been still. The sound came again. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door and crept downstairs. My heart was thumping so hard I thought whoever was down there could hear it. The living room looked normal. The kitchen was dark. I checked every lock again. Nothing. I stood in the hallway for what felt like 10 minutes, gripping the bat, waiting for something to move. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, nerves playing tricks. But just as I turned to go back upstairs, Sophie's bedroom light flicked on. I rushed up the stairs 2 at a time and threw her door open. She was still asleep, curled up on her side, her lamp glowing softly. For a moment, I thought maybe Emily had turned it on earlier and I'd forgotten, but I knew I hadn't. That lamp had a little pull chain that made a distinct click when you switched it on, and I had heard it. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for more sounds. None came. But the unease didn't fade. The following morning, Emily noticed the circles under my eyes. I almost told her everything, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound paranoid. Instead, I said I hadn't slept well and let it go. Sophie seemed cheerful enough at breakfast, drawing on her toast with jam and talking about her new school. I forced a smile and nodded at all the right times, but inside, my mind kept going back to that light and the person under the street lamp. Over the next week, the uneasiness grew. Small things kept happening. A door I swore I'd closed would be standing open. Objects we left on the counter would be in different places by morning. Once, Emily even asked if I'd moved her mug from the kitchen table. I told her I hadn't. She frowned, but let it slide. The worst was when I found Sophie's picture from the fridge lying on the hallway floor. It wasn't torn or crumpled, just placed there neatly, almost like someone wanted us to notice. I finally told myself I was going to set up a camera. I didn't tell Emily or Sophie. No need to scare them. That night, I placed an old camcorder in the living room, angled at the hallway. I told myself I'd check it in the morning and prove once and for all that nothing was wrong. But what I saw the next day only made things worse. The tape started normal enough. Most of it was just static sounds. The refrigerator humming, the faint creak of pipes, the old clock ticking in the hallway. The living room was still, just as I expected. But then, around 2:30 in the morning, something changed. The camera caught a shadow moving across the far wall, just beyond the frame. At first, I thought maybe it was the headlights of a car passing outside, but no light shone through the curtains. The shadow drifted slowly, as if someone was walking, and then it vanished into the corner near the staircase. I leaned closer to the screen, rewinding, replaying, pausing. My throat went dry. The shape wasn't sharp enough to make out details, but it wasn't random either. It had a head, shoulders, a figure. I didn't tell Emily. I couldn't. If she saw it, she'd want to move, and we couldn't afford that kind of upheaval. I told myself I'd run the test one more night, just to be sure. The second night, I set the camera again, this time angling it toward the kitchen. When I reviewed it the next morning, the first few hours were normal. But just after 3 a.m., the tape caught something that chilled me more than the shadow. The kitchen light flicked on. Clear as day, the bulb buzzed to life, washing the room in pale yellow. And then, just as slowly, it flicked off. No one was in frame. No door opened. No footsteps. Nothing. I sat there staring at the screen, the room around me silent, but inside my chest, it felt like a drum was pounding. Someone, or something, was in our house. That evening, I tried to watch Sophie more closely. She was playing with her dolls on the living room rug, humming softly. When she thought I wasn't paying attention, she glanced toward the staircase. It wasn't the usual kind of glance either. It was the look of someone expecting to see something. "Hey," I asked, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" She nodded quickly. "Yeah." I knelt down next to her. "Soph, you tell me if something scared you, right?" She hesitated. Then she whispered, "He doesn't want me to." The words froze me. "Who?" I asked gently. She pressed her lips together and shook her head, refusing to answer. That night, I couldn't sit still. Every creak of the house set me on edge. I checked the doors twice, 3 times. At one point, I walked into the living room and found Sophie's dolls arranged in a circle on the rug. It wasn't the way she usually played. These were placed carefully, each facing the center. I picked one up and set it back on the shelf, trying to convince myself it was just her imagination. But then I noticed something else. Near the bottom of the stairs, one of the wooden floorboards had a small crack running along the edge. I crouched down, ran my hand over it, and realized the board was loose. With a little pressure, it lifted, revealing a shallow space underneath. Inside were scraps of paper, old, yellowed, edges fraying. I pulled one out. It was a photograph, faded, but still visible. A family stood in front of the same house we now lived in. 2 parents, a boy about Sophie's age, and a teenage girl. Their eyes seemed to blur with time, but something about the image made me shiver. When Emily came into the room, I quickly slid the board back into place. She asked what I was doing crouched there. I forced a smile and told her I was just checking the floor. She didn't push. That night, I placed the camera facing the staircase. I had to know what else was hiding in this house. When I checked the footage the next morning, I wished I hadn't. The footage started quietly, same as before. Hours of stillness, nothing but the faint hum of the house. Then, a little after 2:45, movement appeared at the top of the staircase. I leaned in so close my forehead almost touched the screen. A shape stood there, darker than the shadows around it. It didn't walk. It didn't sway. It just stood, like it was watching. I couldn't see a face, but I knew it was looking down toward the camera. And then, slowly, step by step, It began to descend. Each movement was deliberate, almost heavy, but the tape carried no sound of footsteps. When it reached the bottom, the figure turned its head towards Sophie's room, and that was when the screen flickered. The picture warped with static for a second, and when it cleared, the staircase was empty. I felt sick. I wanted to rewind again and again, but every time, it ended the same way. The figure vanished into thin air. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the bat across my lap, the camera still recording, my eyes fixed on the hallway. Nothing happened, but I knew something had been there. The next morning, I tried to act normal for Emily and Sophie. Over breakfast, Emily chatted about her students. Sophie hummed while spreading jam on toast, but all I could think about was that figure. I wanted to tell Emily, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. Later that day, I went back to the loose floorboard. I lifted it carefully, pulled out the old photo again, and checked for anything else inside. More scraps of paper. Some were blank, but one had a few words written in pencil, faded but still readable. He waits in the dark. I shoved the note back under the floor and pressed the board down, my hands trembling. Who wrote that? What did it mean? That night, I told Sophie I'd sit with her until she fell asleep. She nodded, but didn't look relieved. She just stared at the closet door, her little hands gripping her blanket. After she drifted off, I pulled the lamp chain to turn the light out. The room went dark, but almost immediately, I felt a strange shift in the air, like something unseen had stepped closer. I turned the lamp back on. Empty. Just Sophie breathing softly, her dolls lined up neatly on the shelf. I went downstairs, trying to convince myself I was imagining things, when a soft creak echoed from above. I froze. Another creak, then another. They were coming from Sophie's room. I sprinted up the stairs and burst in. She was still asleep, but her closet door was wide open. I was sure, absolutely sure, I'd closed it earlier. I rushed to the door, swung it shut, and held the handle tight. For a moment, I half expected something to pull from the other side. But nothing happened. When I turned around, Sophie's eyes were open. She whispered, almost too soft to hear, "He doesn't like when you do that." I couldn't speak. My legs felt rooted to the floor. The next morning, I finally broke. Over coffee, I told Emily everything. The shadows, the lights, the figure on the camera, even the photo under the floorboards. She listened quietly, her hands wrapped around her mug. When I finished, she just shook her head. "You're scaring yourself," she said. "It's the stress of moving, the house settling. Old houses do this." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. Instead, I just sat there in silence, knowing she didn't believe me. That night, I checked the camera again before bed. It was still rolling. I told myself this time, I'd catch proof strong enough that Emily couldn't deny it. But what I saw the next morning wasn't proof. It was worse. Much worse. The tape started the same way as always, still and quiet. I fast-forwarded through the first few hours, waiting for the usual flicker of movement. My hands were sweating, my stomach tight. Then, right after 3 a.m., the picture changed. At first it was just Sophie's bedroom door, closed, exactly as I had left it. But then, slowly, the knob began to turn. No sound, no footsteps, just that knob, twisting back and forth, as if someone was testing it. I froze, staring. After a few seconds, the door cracked open, just an inch, enough to see darkness beyond. And then a hand appeared, pale, bony, reaching through the gap. The fingers curled around the edge of the door, pushing it wider. My breath caught. The camera was grainy, but I could see the shape clearly, a man's hand. The door opened halfway, and for a moment, I thought someone was about to step out. But instead, the hand slipped back into the darkness and the door eased shut again. I paused the tape, shaking. I wanted to run upstairs, to check on Sophie right that second, even though this had all happened hours earlier. I knew she'd been safe when I left for work that morning, but still, seeing that hand made my skin crawl. When Emily came home, I almost told her. I wanted her to see it with her own eyes. But I stopped myself. If she saw what I saw, she'd pack bags that night, and maybe that was the smart thing to do. But part of me needed answers. I couldn't just run. That night, I stayed up again. I sat in Sophie's room after she fell asleep, the baseball bat across my lap. For hours, nothing happened. Just the sound of her breathing, the faint ticking of the clock on her wall. My eyelids grew heavy. Then, sometime after 3, the closet door rattled. Just a quick shake, like someone had pressed from the inside. I gripped the bat so tight my knuckles ached. I waited, heart pounding. Another rattle. Louder. Sophie stirred, mumbling in her sleep. I stood, ready to swing if that door opened. But it didn't. The rattling stopped. I forced myself to check the closet. I yanked it open, bat raised. Empty. Just her clothes hanging still. I knelt, pulled back her shoes, checked the corners. Nothing. But when I stepped back, something caught my eye. A small hole, low on the back wall. Perfectly round, no bigger than a coin. Fresh edges, as if it had been made recently. I crouched closer. For a second, I thought I saw movement inside, like a shadow shifting. I jerked back, slamming the door shut. The next morning, I told Emily about the hole. I didn't mention the hand on the tape, just the hole. She frowned, more worried than before. "You think someone's been in the house?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "But something's not right." We argued about calling the police. She said they'd think we were crazy, that we didn't have real proof. I said the tape was proof, but she refused to watch it. That night, I filled the hole with wood filler, pressing it in until the wall looked solid again. But even as I did, I knew it wasn't enough. Whoever, or whatever, had made that hole could make another. I lay awake for hours, waiting for the sound of scratching or the rattle of the closet door. But the house stayed quiet. Too quiet. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of the old photo I'd found under the floor. Only this time, the family wasn't smiling. Their faces were blurred, their eyes nothing but black hollows. And behind them, in the window of the house, a figure stood watching. I woke drenched in sweat, my heart racing. I went downstairs for water, trying to steady myself. And that's when I saw it. The photograph from under the floorboard, lying in the middle of the hallway. I hadn't touched it since the day I put it back. I stood there in the hallway staring at the photograph. My hands felt numb. I hadn't touched it since the day I slid it back under the floorboard. Yet there it was, lying in the center of the hall, like someone had placed it there on purpose. Emily came down the stairs a few minutes later, rubbing her eyes. When she saw me standing over the photo, she frowned. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer right away. I just held it up. "Did you move this?" She shook her head. "Of course not. Why would I?" Her voice was sharp, like she thought I was accusing her. But I wasn't. Deep down, I already knew the truth. Neither of us had moved it. I slipped the picture back under the floorboard, pressed the wood down, and looked at her. "We can't stay here." Emily sighed, frustrated, but she didn't argue. Maybe she saw the fear in my face, or maybe she felt it herself. We agreed we'd start looking for another place, even if it meant downsizing. That night, I told Sophie we might be moving. She didn't say anything at first. She just hugged her stuffed bear tighter. Then she whispered, "He won't like that." I froze. "Who won't?" She looked up at me, eyes wide, and said, "The man in the dark." I sat with her until she fell asleep, though my own body refused to rest. Around 3, the familiar hour, the house stirred again. The hallway light flickered. The closet door rattled. And then, clear as anything, I heard footsteps on the stairs. I gripped the bat, heart racing, and waited. The steps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside Sophie's door. I raised the bat high, ready for anything. The doorknob twisted. I didn't wait. I yanked the door open, swinging the bat with everything I had. It sliced through empty air. No one was there. The hallway stretched out in silence. But when I turned back into Sophie's room, my stomach dropped. The closet door was wide open again. I rushed over, slammed it shut, shoved a chair against it. Then I pulled Sophie into my arms, holding her as she stirred in her sleep. My whole body trembled, but I stayed there, rocking her gently until morning light broke through the curtains. By sunrise, Emily had made her decision. "We're leaving today," she said firmly. "I don't care where. I don't care how. We're not staying another night." I didn't argue. We packed fast, grabbing only what we needed. Boxes half filled, drawers left behind. It didn't matter. By evening, we were gone. The house looked strangely calm when we locked the door for the last time. The windows reflected the setting sun. The garden sat still, and from the outside, it looked like any other quiet home on the street. But I knew better. A few weeks later, after we'd settled into a cramped rental across town, I drove past the old place one evening. The curtains were open, lights glowing warmly inside. A new family had already moved in, a couple with 2 little kids. For a moment, I thought about stopping, about warning them, telling them about the shadow on the stairs, the hand at the door, the hole in the closet wall. about the way the photograph kept moving, as if something inside that house wanted to be remembered. But I didn't. Instead, I drove on, hands gripping the wheel, the image of those kids in the window burning into my mind. Some nights, I still dream of that house. In the dream, I'm standing in the hallway, looking at the photo on the floor. And just as I bend to pick it up, a hand, thin, pale, familiar, reaches out of the dark and snatches it away. That's when I always wake up. And each time, I wonder if the new family has seen the photo yet, or if it's still waiting under the floorboards for someone else to find it. We had no business buying that house, not really. It was too big for us, too far from the city, and more than a little outside our budget. But when Emily walked into the front hall and looked up at that tall staircase curling toward the second floor, I saw it in her face. She'd already made up her mind. "This is the one," she whispered. I wanted to be practical. I wanted to remind her that the commute would be longer, that the kids would have to switch schools, that the mortgage would stretch us thinner than we'd ever been. But the truth was, I wanted it too. Something about that house pulled at me. The wide front porch, the rows of trees lining the drive, the sheer sense of history in the walls. It felt like a place where a family could take root. So, against every ounce of reason, we bought it. For the first few weeks, it was exactly what we'd hoped. The kids, Ethan and Lily, ran wild through the big backyard. Emily started planting a little garden by the porch. At night, we sat on the steps with glasses of wine, listening to the cicadas hum in the dark. It was quiet, peaceful, almost perfect. But then the little things started. At first, it was noises. A tapping sound in the walls, always late at night. Sometimes faint, sometimes sharp, like someone knocking from inside the plaster. I figured it was the pipes settling, or maybe mice. Old house problems. Then, Ethan came downstairs one morning with dark circles under his eyes. He was only 9, full of endless energy, but that day he looked worn out. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked. He shrugged. I couldn't sleep. She kept talking. Emily and I exchanged a glance. "Who's she?" "The girl," he said matter-of-factly. "She stands by the window." I tried to smile it off. "Sounds like a dream." But Ethan shook his head. She said my name. That was the first time the house didn't feel right. A week later, Lily, our youngest, started acting strange too. She was only 5, still at the age where she carried her stuffed rabbit everywhere. One evening, I found her in the upstairs hallway, sitting cross-legged on the floor, whispering into the dark. "Who are you talking to, sweetheart?" I asked. She looked up, startled, as if I'd caught her doing something wrong. Then she pointed toward the far end of the hall, where the shadows stretched thick around the old grandfather clock. "She doesn't like when you ask questions," Lily said. I walked to the end of the hall, flicked on the light. Empty, of course. Just the old clock ticking steadily, its pendulum swinging. That night, after the kids were asleep, I told Emily what both of them had said. She was pale, but she tried to rationalize it. "They're adjusting," she said. "It's a new place. Kids get carried away." I nodded, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. A few nights later, I was the one who woke to a sound. It was subtle, like humming, drifting down the hall. I sat up, listening hard. Emily stirred beside me, but didn't wake. The sound was coming from the direction of Ethan's room. I climbed out of bed, careful not to wake her, and padded down the hall. The door was cracked open, just a sliver. I pushed it gently, and what I saw made my stomach clench. Ethan was sitting upright in bed, his eyes half open, as if caught between sleep and waking. At the foot of his bed stood a figure. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, her hair long and tangled, her dress pale. She was humming softly, a tune I didn't recognize. For a moment, I froze, my brain refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing. Then I blinked, and she was gone. Ethan stirred, muttering something under his breath. I rushed forward, shaking him gently awake. "Ethan, hey, wake up." His eyes snapped open. "Dad," I forced a smile. "Bad dream, buddy. Go back to sleep." But my hands were trembling as I pulled the blanket over him. Back in our room, I lay awake the rest of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying that image over and over. The girl, the humming, the way she vanished like smoke. The next morning, Ethan looked at me across the breakfast table. "You saw her, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I couldn't answer. I didn't know what to say to him. His eyes were steady on mine, too steady for a 9-year-old. I forced myself to smile, tried to play it off, but the words stuck in my throat. Emily noticed the look between us. "What's this about?" she asked. Nothing, I said too quickly. Ethan kept staring, but he didn't push. He just turned back to his cereal, spoon clinking in the bowl, and I could feel the weight of something unsaid hanging in the air. That day, I couldn't focus on work. I sat in the study, laptop open, but every creak of the house made me glance toward the hall. I'd never been the type to believe in ghosts. I was the guy who laughed at horror movies, who rolled his eyes at true haunting shows. But now, in the silence of that house, I couldn't shake the image of the girl standing at the end of Ethan's bed. By evening, I decided I needed answers. While Emily cooked and the kids watched TV, I went up to the attic. It was cramped, full of dust and boxes left behind by the previous owners. Most of it was junk, old Christmas lights, cracked picture frames, yellowed newspapers. But in one box, shoved behind a stack of books, I found a bundle of photographs. Most were harmless snapshots of families who must have lived there decades ago. Smiling kids on bicycles, holiday dinners, parents posing on the porch. But near the bottom, there was one that made my skin prickle. A girl, maybe 12 or 13, long hair, pale dress, standing in the very hallway outside Ethan's room. Her face was turned slightly, as if she hadn't expected the picture to be taken. And even though the photo was faded, I swear her eyes looked straight into mine. I shoved the photo back into the box and closed it quickly, my hands shaking. That night, I didn't tell Emily. She was already on edge, though she tried to hide it. Instead, I lay awake, listening again for the humming. It came, right on time. Around 3 in the morning. This time I followed it. Slowly, carefully, down the hall. It wasn't coming from Ethan's room. It was coming from Lily's. Her door was half open, the soft glow of her nightlight spilling into the hall. I pushed it wider, and my heart nearly stopped. Lily was sitting on the floor, her stuffed rabbit clutched in one hand. Across from her sat the same girl I'd seen before. Long hair, pale dress, knees folded neatly under her. They were facing each other like friends whispering secrets. I stood frozen in the doorway, not breathing, afraid that if I moved, the moment would break. Then Lily looked up, saw me, and smiled. "It's okay, Daddy," she said softly. "She just wants to play." The girl turned her head toward me. For a fraction of a second, our eyes locked. Cold, hollow, and then she was gone. Lily frowned, confused, and looked at the empty space where the girl had been. "You scared her away," she said. I scooped her up, heart pounding, and carried her to our room. Emily woke, groggy, and asked what was wrong. I just shook my head. "She's sleeping with us tonight." But inside, I knew it was getting worse. The next morning, Emily pressed me for answers. She could tell by the way I'd clutched Lily all night that something had happened. When I told her, her face went pale. "You saw her?" "Not just the kids," she whispered. I nodded. There was no point denying it anymore. Emily sat at the edge of the bed, her hands shaking in her lap. "We need to know what this is. We can't just sit here waiting for her." So that day, after dropping the kids at school, we drove into town and stopped at the county records office. The clerk, an older woman with half-moon glasses, raised an eyebrow when we asked about our address. "That house," she muttered, tapping her keyboard. She disappeared into the back for a few minutes, then returned with a thin folder. She slid it across the counter like she didn't want to touch it. Inside were old property records, police reports, and faded black and white photos. The deeper we read, the colder I felt. The house had belonged to the Whitakers in the 1960s. A couple, their teenage son, and their younger daughter, Claire. She was 13 when she disappeared. The police report said she'd gone missing one night. Her parents told investigators she'd gone to bed as usual, but in the morning, her room was empty. No signs of forced entry. No footprints. Just gone. The case had gone unsolved. The family moved away a year later. After that, the house changed hands many times. A note paperclip to the file listed complaints from later tenants, strange noises, child's voice in the night, apparitions. None had stayed longer than a few years. Emily closed the folder, her lips pressed tight. "So she's still there," she whispered. We didn't talk much on the drive home. My thoughts kept circling back to Ethan's words. "She stands by the window." And Lily's, "She just wants to play." That night, we tried to act normal. We ate dinner, helped with homework, watched TV. But when bedtime came, Ethan refused to sleep in his room. Lily begged to keep her closet light on. Emily and I let them both sleep in our bed. Around 3, I woke to the sound of humming again. My heart sank. I slipped out of bed carefully, not wanting to wake anyone, and followed the sound down the hall. It led me toward the stairs. There, halfway down, stood Claire. Her pale dress seemed to shimmer in the dark, her hair hanging loose around her face. She wasn't humming this time. She was whispering. I couldn't hear the words, but she kept pointing, slowly, insistently, toward the basement door. I wanted to turn away. Every instinct told me to go back upstairs, lock the door, crawl under the blankets with my family. But something stronger pulled me forward. I crept down the stairs, my hand brushing the railing, eyes fixed on her figure. She didn't move, didn't blink, just pointed. When I reached the bottom, I turned the basement knob. It groaned as it opened, the air rushing up cold and damp. I flicked on the light. The bulb buzzed, casting weak shadows against the concrete walls. The basement was empty. Just boxes, paint cans, the furnace. But then I saw it. In the far corner, half hidden behind an old shelf, was a small wooden door. Low to the ground, like a crawl space. I'd never noticed it before. The humming started again, faint but steady, echoing from behind that little door. I froze at the sight of that little wooden door. It was barely 3 feet high, nailed shut along the edges, the paint around it flaking with age. The humming behind it was soft, almost sweet, like a lullaby carried through the cracks. My first instinct was to back away, pretend I hadn't seen it. But something about the sound held me there. It wasn't just humming, it was a voice, low and faint, almost like it was calling me closer. I grabbed a hammer from the shelf and pried at the nails. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the tool steady. Each nail squealed as it came loose, the humming growing clearer with every one I pulled free. When the last nail fell, I yanked the little door open. The smell hit me first, damp earth and something sour, rotten. The crawl space stretched about 6 feet deep, dirt floor, wooden beams sagging above. And in the center of it, half buried in soil, was a small trunk. Old, heavy, the lid warped from years of moisture. The humming stopped. The crawl space went dead silent. I crouched down, heart hammering, and pulled the trunk out into the light. The lock was rusted, the hinges barely holding. One sharp hit with the hammer broke it open. Inside were bones. Small ones. Fragile. A child's. They were wrapped in the tattered remains of a pale dress. Strands of long, dark hair clung to the fabric. And at the very bottom, beneath the skeleton, was a small ribbon, faded but still pink. My stomach turned. My throat tightened. Claire hadn't just disappeared. She'd been here the whole time. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the hammer. The air seemed to close in, pressing heavy on my chest. Then I heard it, the softest laugh, right behind me. I spun around. The crawl space was empty, the basement walls bare. But in that moment, I knew she wasn't gone. Finding her body hadn't set her free. If anything, it had woken her up. I slammed the little door shut and stumbled upstairs, shaking, filthy, the sound of my own heartbeat roaring in my ears. Emily was waiting at the top, her face pale. "What did you find?" she asked. I wanted to lie, to tell her it was nothing, but the words spilled out before I could stop them. When I finished, she covered her mouth, tears brimming in her eyes. "What do we do?" she whispered. I didn't know. That night, neither of us slept. We kept the kids in our room, all 4 of us huddled together. Every creak of the house made me jolt. Around 3, the air turned cold. Sophie's nightlight flickered, and then came the humming, louder than ever, echoing through the walls. Ethan stirred, half asleep, and whispered, "She's mad. You weren't supposed to open it." Emily clutched my arm, trembling. I sat there in the dark, listening to the sound of Claire moving through the house. Footsteps in the hall, the brush of a hand against the wall, the click of a door handle. She wasn't just visiting anymore. She was everywhere, and she knew we had found her. By morning, the house felt like it was holding its breath. None of us had slept. The kids sat quietly at the table, their bowls of cereal untouched. Emily kept glancing at the windows as though expecting someone to appear on the other side. I couldn't shake the feeling that every corner of the house was being watched. "We have to leave," Emily said firmly. "Today. Now." I nodded. I didn't need convincing. But packing with 2 scared kids clinging to us took longer than it should have. We moved into the old brick townhouse in the fall. Sarah fell in love with it instantly, saying it felt like a house with a soul. Our son, Jacob, wasn't so sure. At 7, he clung close to my leg on the first tour, his wide eyes darting around the narrow hallways. The first odd thing happened maybe a week in. I woke one night to the sound of light footsteps outside our bedroom. I thought it was Jacob sneaking down the hall, but when I stepped out, the corridor was empty. Jacob's door was shut, his night light glowing faintly. A few nights later, Sarah admitted she'd heard the same thing. Like little feet, she said, brushing her teeth. Running. Did you hear it too? I lied and told her no. Jacob began waking up tired. He started talking about the girl. At first it sounded like a dream, but soon he called her by name. Anna. One Saturday, I heard him whispering in his room, not in the playful way kids talk to toys, but like a real conversation. When I opened the door, he looked up calmly and said, "She doesn't like when you interrupt." That night, Sarah and I found a drawing Jacob had made of the house. In one of the upstairs windows, he had drawn a girl's face, hair falling across one eye. "That's Anna," he said simply. And then came the night I woke to the sound of breathing in the corner of our bedroom. Slow, steady, human breathing. When I turned on the lamp, there was nothing there. Underscore. Revised Section 2. Excerpt with new names. The next morning, Jacob picked at his breakfast and muttered, "Anna says you don't like her." Sarah forced a smile, but her hand trembled. That night, Jacob cried himself awake. When I rushed into his room, I froze. All his stuffed animals were arranged in a perfect circle on the rug, and he was inside it, sobbing. "She won't let me sleep." I went digging through old records. That's when I found the name. In 1893, the Collins family lived in the house. They had a daughter named Anna who died at age 11. When I told Sarah, she shook her head. "Coincidence," she whispered. But that night, Jacob proved her wrong. He hummed a lullaby Sarah didn't know. The same melody I'd heard echoing in the hall. Just before dawn, I heard it again. Not from Jacob's room. This time from the end of the hallway. Underscore. The humming carried down the hall like it had been waiting for me to notice. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, every instinct telling me to wake Sarah. But I didn't. I slipped out quietly, the floor groaning under my bare feet, and followed the sound. It stopped the second I reached the end of the hall. Jacob's door was closed, his nightlight leaking out in a thin strip under the frame. I pressed my ear against the wood. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, faintly, I heard his voice. He wasn't humming. He was talking. "Okay, I'll tell him," he whispered. I opened the door. Jacob was sitting up in bed, eyes half-lidded, like he wasn't fully awake. His lips moved slowly, forming words I couldn't make out. "Jacob," I said gently, stepping closer. He blinked hard, then looked straight at me. "She says you found her name." The words knocked the air out of me. Before I could respond, his head drooped, and he slumped back onto the pillow, fast asleep. I sat beside him for nearly an hour, watching his chest rise and fall, afraid to leave him alone. In the morning, Jacob didn't remember a thing. Over breakfast, Sarah noticed the circles under my eyes and asked what was wrong. I shook my head, unwilling to tell her exactly what he'd said. She already thought I was letting this get into my head too much. But that day, she saw it for herself. We were in the kitchen, washing dishes while Jacob colored at the table. He was drawing another picture of the house. "Daddy," he said suddenly, "Anna wants to know why you don't like her." I froze with the dish in my hand. Sarah turned sharply. "Jacob, who told you to say that?" He shrugged, never lifting his crayon from the page. "Anna did. She said she was here before us. She said she doesn't want to leave again." Sarah dropped the glass she was drying. It shattered on the floor. That night, she admitted she couldn't keep pretending. "Something's happening here, Daniel. Something we can't explain." Her hands shook as she spoke. "We need to protect him. Whatever this is, it's after Jacob." We agreed he would sleep in our room. But around 3 in the morning, Jacob sat bolt upright in bed. His eyes were open, glassy, and he began to hum. That same haunting lullaby. "Jacob," I whispered, shaking him gently. "Wake up." His lips curved into a faint smile that didn't look like his. And in a voice that wasn't quite his own, he murmured, "She says the door in the basement isn't locked." I felt ice slide down my spine. The next day, I searched the basement from top to bottom. Nothing unusual, just the furnace, old boxes, and stone walls. No door, no hidden passage. But Jacob's words gnawed at me. That evening, I went down again with a flashlight. I tapped along the walls, ran my hand over the rough stone. And then, behind a leaning shelf stacked with paint cans, I felt it. A seam. A thin outline of wood beneath layers of plaster. It wasn't visible until I pulled the shelf aside, but once I did, I saw it clearly. A narrow wooden door, sealed shut, painted to match the wall. Jacob's words echoed in my head. The door in the basement isn't locked. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle. The handle was rusted, stiff beneath my grip. For a second, I thought it wouldn't move at all. Then, with a grinding screech, it turned. Dust rained down from the wall as the old wood shifted, cracking at the edges. I hesitated. Every instinct in me screamed to stop, to leave it sealed. But something heavier pulled at me, the same pull that had dragged me down here in the first place. I shoved the door open. Behind it was a narrow passage, no wider than my shoulders, descending steeply into the dark. The smell hit me first. Earth, mildew, and something older, sour and clinging. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through dust and cobwebs. The steps were uneven stone, leading downward. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. Then, from somewhere deep below, came the faint sound of humming. I swallowed hard and started down. The passage seemed endless, twisting downward, the air growing colder with every step. My flashlight flickered once, and I smacked it, whispering a curse. The humming grew louder, clearer, unmistakably a child's voice. Finally, the passage opened into a low chamber. Dirt walls pressed close on either side. In the middle of the floor sat a wooden chair. Small, child-sized, rotted through but still standing. And around it, scratched into the dirt floor, was a circle. Deep, rough marks, like fingernails clawing again and again to form the shape. I moved closer, my light shaking in my hand. That's when I saw the ribbons. Faded strips of pink fabric, tied to the legs of the chair. They crumbled when I touched them. My stomach turned. And then I felt it. A breath. Cold air brushed against my ear, and a voice whispered so close it could have been inside my head. You found me. Every view, every like, and every new subscriber helps keep these stories alive. If you're someone who craves that late-night chill, that heart-racing moments, then this is your place. Subscribe to Eclipse Stories right now and become part of a community that doesn't just listen to stories. We live them together. Don't just watch from the shadows. Step in, join us, and never miss the next night of fear. Now let's dive into the story. It's been almost 15 years now, but I can still remember the first night we stepped into that house. Back then, nothing about it felt unusual. My wife, Emily, had fallen in love with the tall windows that looked out onto the street, and my daughter, Sophie, couldn't stop running up and down the long hallway that led to the back door. We'd been searching for months, trying to find a place that felt like more than just a house. This one felt like the answer we had been waiting for. I remember walking through each room and picturing our life filling the space. The kitchen smelled faintly of fresh paint. The walls still carried the echo of the last owner's hammer. And even though the floor creaked in places, it had a certain warmth that pulled us in. We told ourselves it wasn't just four walls. It was a new start, a place where Sophie could grow up safe. That first week, we were full of excitement. Emily unpacked the dishes. Sophie drew pictures of our family that she taped to the fridge, and I busied myself in the garage, already imagining it as a little workshop. The neighbors waved politely when they saw us, and for a while, I thought we'd found the quiet corner of the world we'd always wanted. At night, Emily and I sat on the back porch with cups of tea, listening to the sound of crickets while Sophie slept upstairs. Everything felt easy, almost too easy, in hindsight. The first strange thing happened about 2 weeks in. It was late, around midnight, and I had just finished locking the doors before heading up to bed. I passed by the living room window and noticed someone standing across the street. At first, I thought maybe it was a neighbor out for a smoke, but they weren't near any of the houses. They were right under the streetlight, head tilted up toward our home. Their face was hidden by the shadow of a hood, and the way they just stood there without moving made my skin crawl. I didn't wake Emily. I told myself it was nothing, maybe some teenager cutting through the neighborhood. By the time I checked again, the person was gone. The street was empty, silent except for the buzzing of the lamp above. I tried to laugh it off, but it stuck with me. The next night, I saw something else. This time, I was brushing my teeth when I heard Sophie call out. It wasn't a scream, more like a whimper, the kind a child makes when caught in a bad dream. I went to her room, expecting to find her half asleep, but she was sitting upright in bed with her blanket clutched tight around her shoulders. "What is it, sweetheart?" I asked. She pointed at her closet. "Someone was there," she whispered. I checked. Of course, there was nothing, just her little dresses and jackets swinging from their hangers. I smiled, told her it was only her imagination, and tucked her back in. But when I turned off the light, she begged me to leave the closet door closed. That part bothered me. Sophie had always liked sleeping with it open, claiming she didn't like the dark. I didn't tell Emily right away. She was already overwhelmed with the move and settling into her new teaching job. I convinced myself it was just adjustment nerves. Kids get scared in new rooms. Still, a small thought lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. A few nights later, I woke to a sound downstairs. It was soft, like someone stepping carefully, trying not to be heard. I sat up in bed, listening. Emily was asleep beside me, her breathing steady, and the house should have been still. The sound came again. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door and crept downstairs. My heart was thumping so hard I thought whoever was down there could hear it. The living room looked normal. The kitchen was dark. I checked every lock again. Nothing. I stood in the hallway for what felt like 10 minutes, gripping the bat, waiting for something to move. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it, nerves playing tricks. But just as I turned to go back upstairs, Sophie's bedroom light flicked on. I rushed up the stairs 2 at a time and threw her door open. She was still asleep, curled up on her side, her lamp glowing softly. For a moment, I thought maybe Emily had turned it on earlier and I'd forgotten, but I knew I hadn't. That lamp had a little pull chain that made a distinct click when you switched it on, and I had heard it. That night, I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, waiting for more sounds. None came, but the unease didn't fade. The following morning, Emily noticed the circles under my eyes. I almost told her everything, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound paranoid. Instead, I said I hadn't slept well and let it go. Sophie seemed cheerful enough at breakfast, drawing on her toast with jam and talking about her new school. I forced a smile and nodded at all the right times, but inside, my mind kept going back to that light and the person under the street lamp. Over the next week, the uneasiness grew. Small things kept happening. A door I swore I'd closed would be standing open. Objects we left on the counter would be in different places by morning. Once, Emily even asked if I'd moved her mug from the kitchen table. I told her I hadn't. She frowned, but let it slide. The worst was when I found Sophie's picture from the fridge lying on the hallway floor. It wasn't torn or crumpled, just placed there neatly, almost like someone wanted us to notice. I finally told myself I was going to set up a camera. I didn't tell Emily or Sophie. No need to scare them. That night, I placed an old camcorder in the living room, angled at the hallway. I told myself I'd check it in the morning and prove once and for all that nothing was wrong. But what I saw the next day only made things worse. The tape started normal enough. Most of it was just static sounds. The refrigerator humming, the faint creak of pipes, the old clock ticking in the hallway. The living room was still, just as I expected. But then, around 2:30 in the morning, something changed. The camera caught a shadow moving across the far wall, just beyond the frame. At first, I thought maybe it was the headlights of a car passing outside, but no light shone through the curtains. The shadow drifted slowly, as if someone was walking, and then it vanished into the corner near the staircase. Each time I carried a box down the hall, I caught glimpses of her, a pale figure in the corner of my vision, hair hanging loose, head tilted, watching, always watching. At one point, Lily froze in the middle of the stairs, clutching her rabbit. "She doesn't want us to go," she whispered. I scooped her up without answering, my chest tight. By late afternoon, we had most of what we needed loaded into the car. I told Emily to take the kids outside while I grabbed a few last things from the study. The house was dim and silent, the air heavy. I shoved books and papers into a box as quickly as I could, but then I felt it, cold fingers brushing against the back of my neck. I spun around. She was there, Claire, standing in the doorway, her pale dress torn, her hair hanging in tangled strands, her hollow eyes fixed on me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she opened her mouth. Her voice was soft, almost childlike, but it seemed to echo from every wall. "Don't leave me here." My throat was dry. "You're not supposed to be here," I whispered. "You're gone. You're—" She stepped closer, her face twisted with something between sorrow and rage. "Don't leave me," she repeated, louder this time. The walls seemed to shake with it. I backed away, fumbling for the door. "I'm sorry," I said, though I wasn't even sure what I was apologizing for. "I can't," she screamed then, a sound so sharp and piercing it felt like it split the air. Every light in the house flickered and blew out at once, plunging me into darkness. I bolted for the hall, stumbling blindly, the echo of that scream chasing me. When I burst outside, gasping, Emily was already in the car with the kids, their faces pale and terrified. I jumped in, started the engine, and we tore down the drive without looking back. We didn't stop driving until we were halfway across town. That night, crammed into a cheap motel room, the kids finally slept, though fitfully. Emily sat beside me on the bed, silent tears streaking her face. Neither of us spoke much. What could we say? We never went back. The movers collected the rest of our things weeks later. The house went up for sale again, the listing bright and cheerful, the description full of words like charming and historic. Sometimes I wonder if the new owners ever found the crawl space, if they ever heard the humming. But what haunts me most isn't the house, it's Ethan. A few nights ago, long after we'd settled into our new place, I found him awake in bed, staring at the window. "She followed us," he whispered. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that ghosts don't travel, that he was just having a bad dream. But then I saw it. A faint shape reflected in the glass. A girl with tangled hair and a pale dress, standing just behind me. You're still listening? That means you can't look away, can you? Make sure to subscribe to Eclipse Stories before the next shadow falls. Now let's step into the next story. I spun around, but the chamber was empty. Just dirt walls and that rotting chair. The humming started again, this time right behind me. I staggered back, the beam of my flashlight dancing wildly. The chair was empty, yet the ribbons shifted as if tugged by unseen hands. I bolted. My footsteps thundered up the stone steps, the humming chasing me, louder, faster, filling the passage until it felt like it was inside my chest. I slammed the basement door shut behind me and shoved a shelf in front of it, my whole body trembling. When I stumbled upstairs, Sarah was waiting. She'd heard the noise, saw the dirt on my hands, the look in my eyes. "What did you find?" she demanded. I couldn't answer. I didn't want to say it out loud, but Jacob did it for me. He was standing in the hallway, pale in the dim light, eyes glassy. "She's glad you opened it," he said softly. Sarah rushed to him, trying to shake him out of it. But Jacob didn't move. He just smiled faintly, like someone else was smiling through him. That night, we tried to keep him in our room, but around 3, I woke to find his side of the bed empty. Panic shot through me. I tore through the house, calling his name. I found him standing in the basement, in front of the shelf I had pushed against the hidden door. He was humming, the same lullaby. When I grabbed his shoulders, he looked up at me with those glassy eyes and whispered, "She's waiting for me." I carried Jacob upstairs that night, his small body limp in my arms, still humming under his breath. Sarah was waiting in the hallway, her face pale, tears brimming in her eyes. "He was down there again, wasn't he?" she whispered. I nodded, too shaken to speak. We locked our bedroom door and kept him between us until morning. But the humming never really stopped. It leaked into our dreams, into the silence of the house, into the rhythm of the walls themselves. By morning, Sarah was done pretending. "We can't stay here," she said, her voice sharp with fear. "We'll pack. We'll leave, I don't care where." She wants him, Daniel. She wants Jacob. I agreed, but it was already too late. When I went to wake Jacob, I found the sheets of his bed covered in dirt. His feet, too. He hadn't been with us the whole night. Somehow, without unlocking the door, he had gone back down there. I shook him awake, my voice breaking. "Jacob, why? Why are you going to her?" He blinked at me slowly, and for a moment, his eyes weren't his. They were distant, glassy, like he was staring through me. Then, in that low, steady voice, he said, "She was alone for so long. I promised I wouldn't leave her." My stomach dropped. Promised. I grabbed his shoulders, trying to shake him back to me. "Jacob, she's not your friend. She's not." He jerked away, his face twisting in anger. "You don't understand. You don't know what she did for me." Sarah pulled him close, holding him tight, tears streaking down her face. I didn't know what he meant. Didn't want to know. We packed that day, throwing whatever we could into boxes. The plan was simple: leave, never look back. But as the sun set, Jacob disappeared again. We found him in the basement. The shelf I'd shoved against the hidden door was pushed aside, the little wooden door wide open. Jacob was inside the passage, standing just before the steps that led down into the earth. "Jacob!" Sarah cried, her voice echoing. He turned to us, eyes wide, and for the first time, I saw fear in them. His lips trembled. "I can't stop humming," he whispered. "She won't let me." Behind him, in the dark of the passage, a second figure began to form. A small girl in a pale dress, her hair tangled, her face half hidden. "Anna." She lifted her head and looked straight at us. Her mouth curved into a smile that didn't belong to a child. Sarah screamed, yanking Jacob back. I rushed forward, slamming the door shut, hammering the nails back in with my fists until my knuckles bled. The humming swelled behind it, furious, desperate, but I didn't stop until the door was sealed again. We left that night. We didn't finish packing, didn't even lock the front door. We just drove, the headlights cutting through the empty road, Sarah clutching Jacob as if he might vanish from her arms. It's been months now. We live in a small rental, nothing special, but safe. At least, that's what we tell ourselves. But some nights, I wake to find Jacob sitting up in bed, his lips moving, that same tune spilling softly into the room. And once, just once, I woke to see ribbons on the floor beside him, faded pink, crumbling at the edges, as though they had followed him here.